Hello, hello.
Welcome back to I Am Perspective Radio. I am your co-host Joe Rel H. Whitfield.
And I am Nasi Alam, and we are the co founders of I Am Perspective and I Am Perspective Radio.
And welcome to episode number 7, The Thin Blue Line.
Yes.
Ooh, we gotta get our sound effects going. It would have been like sirens right there. Woo, woo, woo. So we're laughing. We're gonna try to make this as homely and cordial as possible because anytime we get
Oh, okay.
because anytime
If that doesn't get your attention.
yeah, right. That's how we're starting this, right? Anytime we get to talking about conversations with law enforcement or the police, it gets very daunting. It gets very serious, and there are many serious things to talk about. But we also want to be able to actually have the conversation and see what that looks like. So today's episode, once again, The Thin Blue Line. We have a very, very special guest in with us that we'll be introducing in one very quick moment. But first, I'll throw it over to Nasi.
Yes. So we first had one of our first events around crime and punishment a year ago, actually, a year ago to this month. And during that crime and punishment perspective workshop, we had people in that room that were former inmates, family members of inmates, and also people who have had no experience with anyone in the prison system. And what we found out from that specific event is that people who don't have experience with people in the prison system, they have a certain perspective. And when they're able to sit across from someone who's dealing with it, a family member, they can actually look at things a little bit differently. Now that's one level of perspective. What we're trying to do today, what we're looking for is someone of the law enforcement community to speak with us because we also realize that there is a perspective there as well. So we are really excited for our guest here tonight. Before we introduce her, we just wanted to introduce something that she worked on before coming to our show, right, that we are really excited to share with you. So let's just... You can, Pam. For those,
streets,
yeah,
taken at the hands of
Bring this back one too.
yeah. For those of you who are not following us on live, on YouTube or Wems Radio, you can please go on there now. We are going to be getting off live shortly.
I'm in
Yeah. Good. All right.
mourning from the loss of life happening daily on our community streets, taken at the hands of each other. I mourn the lives unnecessarily taken by police. I mourn the deaths of cops whose lives have been senselessly taken by folks who have lost their faith in humanity. And I especially mourn those who have lost their faith in humanity. America, we have a problem, and that means it's time for leadership everywhere to step up. That might mean you and me. No more rhetoric, no more blanket statements, and please, no more choosing sides. Let us acknowledge that we have a problem with some white men policing in our Black communities. Let us acknowledge that we have a problem with lawlessness and abuse of authority. Let us acknowledge that we have many crippling issues inside of Black communities. Let us also acknowledge that many of the systems that are in place are the cause of those crippling issues. Let us acknowledge there's a responsibility that we all have in moving forward.
All right, we're gonna stop it there. We're gonna put this link to the. Definitely take this off. We're gonna put a link to this full video from Miss Lisa Marie Newkirk. So, as I introduce our special guest today, I'm gonna read a little bit about her. Miss Lisa Marie is an experienced investigator who has conducted criminal investigations on suspects and character investigations on thousands of police applicants for hire. She is also a certified life coach and inspirational speaker who is passionate about bringing her clients and audiences to experience their best lives. Lisa Marie has impacted thousands of people with her YouTube video message, #IamCopAndCommunity. A message about leadership and responsibility in the aftermath of the deaths of Black men and police officers across the country. So please help us, everybody here in this room. Our very special guest today, Miss Lisa Marie Newkirk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, yes,
So Lisa, it's a pleasure for us to have you here with us today. I'm gonna start off with a simple question. Why did you join the police force?
Okay, well, I was about 20 years old when I started receiving notifications from law enforcement to join. Actually, my grandmother encouraged me to take civil service exams from the age of 16. So joining and having a newborn baby at the time meant benefits and, yeah, a salary.
Okay. Um, so something before we start the rest of the conversation that I want to go over and some of the rules of Iron Perspective is that one, we believe that everyone has a perspective to share. However, while we may be able to speak on certain things, you being a woman, a black woman, a retired cop, we do acknowledge that you do not represent everyone, right? So today, as we speak to Lisa, let's keep in mind that this is about Lisa and Lisa's perspective only, and so she does not represent the whole cop community or all black women or anything that you don't want to represent.
And at the
right?
heart of Iron Perspective, as we talk about all the time, none of the way we come from our conversations, and I think what we get so much benefit from is that a person doesn't have to represent everything. I don't have to represent all of the black community. Nussie doesn't have to represent all of the Muslims and short people. And we can just come from our own perspective and get individual stories. So we had to highlight that before, because we know a lot of people are tuning in and wanting to hear what you have to say. Understand this is an individual's perspective and experience.
Yes.
Thank you.
So with that being said, right, which groups do you identify with and belong to in this specific conversation? Who do you believe you are representing in terms of a perspective? Like, what kind of perspective are you able to offer us here today?
The human perspective, because I represent humanity. I represent communities of color. I represent the police. I represent brotherhood, motherhood. I represent a lot of communities, a lot of things, yeah.
Great.
Now, I know we got questions, but I have like a whole bunch off the rip. But the most not important, but one of the most asked questions are about police and communications. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this, it's been kind of difficult for us to get police to speak, period. And we're like, no, man, we're not like that. We're not. But even to get officers to speak, period. Why is that? Why is that from your perspective?
From my perspective, is that cops are afraid of, especially while they're working, misrepresenting themselves or misrepresenting the department. There are guidelines around making public statements about the department, as a member of the department. So, yeah, that would be a reason, and then maybe. Maybe people haven't gotten comfortable with their thoughts, ideas, and beliefs about what's happening yet to have the courage to actually have this conversation yet.
Yeah. I hear that. Do you think there's a level of being misunderstood, like the idea of being misunderstood, or the fact that some people might not believe that cops have a perspective or, have their own feelings in the matter of what's happening in our communities? Do you think that's part of that as well?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the experience between communities of color and the police are about misunderstanding. In fact, I think that we have more in common than we do have differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I was talking to my mom. She shared something interesting with me about police. I thought it was always like this people against police thing. And she made a mention about when she was growing up, there were beat cops. And it seemed like a subtle thing, but she was saying the change of beat cops into squad cars, and then it took away the it took away the neighborhood aspect of the officer, because when you had beat cops, you had cops who would walk the neighborhood. They knew the blocks, they knew the neighbors, and for whatever reason, over time, that has changed. Do you see that as a reason? One of the reasons, and if not, what do you think are the reasons why there's been a void between police and the community?
I would agree that that's one reason. Probably one like 1,000th of a reason why. I was actually one of those beat cops. I started my career actually in a community where I grew up in Harlem, and in public housing, and yeah, I remember what that was like, having those relationships with the people that you saw every day.
Right.
They knew that you were, coming down the block, and yeah, you had relationships. So yeah, politics and enforcement changed, not because the people that you see walking those beats decided that it was going to be different and they didn't want to have those relationships anymore. It's that, from the top down, there was orders to do things differently. And I don't think that, we saw it coming, or that we, meaning the boots to the ground people knew what was happening when that happened. But it definitely caused a strain on relationships. However, I am aware that that is changing and going back to more of a community style policing, that's being encouraged more, and there's relationships with businesses and communities and lots of things really happening with police. But again, that doesn't get publicized. So, it goes unnoticed.
I can say, I'm growing up in New York as a black man. I'm very vocal about my relationship with the police. It was never good. However, doing this work, we do see the efforts changing. As we're looking for more people to have these conversations, and even for the community, we do see the spaces are opening. We're coming from a place of conversation. A lot of times people are asking, what's the point? Well, what after the conversation? And it kind of gets marginalized. But like, we always believe that it has to start with a conversation. I know from our standpoint, we can see that there's more of that at least trying to happen.
Yeah. So we have some interns that we've been speaking to who have various perspectives around dealing with the cops. So you mentioned that there's a lot of things taking place in the community that people don't realize. And so something that surprised me, because we get to learn as we're having conversations with people, is that our interns named specific precincts, and so one precinct they blamed for the death of their brother, and they don't get along with at all. And then there's another precinct where, and I don't know the numbers, but where they're like, they're our friends, like they know us and they're in the neighborhood and we can actually like go to them. They don't harass us, they don't bother us. So they're having a very different experience based on which cops that they're relating to. What would you say, like having been in the force yourself, do you think that it's different based on which neighborhoods you're in or who your commanders are?
Because just like we come as unique individuals, and different houses have their own way of doing things. It's a house, and they have a culture within that house, in that community, and relationships look different. Your relationship inside of your family may look different from Jarrell's relationship with his family, and it's just the same. Really, it's a family of police inside of a family of community, and how we relate to each other is really coming from a human experience. Yeah. It's under like, I know we want to place that responsibility on the police alone, but what has community done to create relationship inside that community? Is it just the police having a closed, giving a closed experience to the community, or is the community also closed?
Okay, that's a great question. But what has your experience been as an officer, from both sides?
So as an officer, my experience has been that I am unique, and I love people, and so I'm always having great experiences with the public. I actually was able to serve in a community where I grew up, and I was excited about being somebody who was viewed as a member of community, a woman of color. It actually worked for me to be a woman, to be black, to be, in Harlem.
To be representing the people that you're
Yeah.
working with.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that's another major thing when we talk about beat cops, and not only when you put police officers in cars, when you do that, you're able to have officers be in different neighborhoods that they're not usually from, or they're just policing. And it's a different sentiment when you're just in somebody's neighborhood, you don't know the people, you're there to police, so you're there for the crime, and it's a different feel. I think from my experience, again, I'm not an officer, so I've only had experiences from the people side, you know. That's why we would have an officer to balance that out, because I've only heard, to be very honest, I've only heard from the people side and what it looks like when officers are in the neighborhood and they don't care, or they don't feel like, they don't seem like they care. Yeah, that's what it is.
So, just sharing a quick story. I think the policing problem is not just specific to New York or America. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Barcelona, and they also have a policing problem out there where a lot of the police that are in the neighborhoods come from different neighborhoods altogether, and so then they come and they don't know how to deal with the people or the culture. What kind of measures do you think should be put in place so that communities and cops can come to a certain understanding or a certain cultural understanding in respective neighborhoods? Like, what do you think needs to be in place for people to actually respect the cops that are in their neighborhood, and then the cops also understanding what that neighborhood's like so they can, react with them and act with them in a proper way?
Well, I think a lot of things are already in place, like diversity training, sensitivity training. The police department employs a lot of training so that people are aware. I think having it be experiential, right, would serve, and also having communities be willing to step in and create opportunities for the police to be present, right? So it's really going to take being intentional about understanding one another to have this happen. Sometimes it's my experience that on both sides, police and community, that we're looking for justification, and sometimes, right, we want this truth that we believe to be unfolded, and we want somebody to be responsible. We want someone to be sorry for it. And yeah, maybe they should be, but does that get us to the resolve of the issues, right? Because we're constantly collecting evidence about what's wrong, with
Versus
community.
what's right.
Yes, around these issues.
Yeah. I think I'm writing some words down that are popping up to echo back to your video, which when you're really talking about a step up of leadership, and really from everybody.
Yeah.
And even in listening to this conversation now, I think what I'm not hearing often is power, right? In the communities, people are coming from a place of the police have the power, and therefore, how do we react to the power, as opposed to what can the community do to present, things to match the police.
Right.
And I don't think enough citizens or regular people even hear it in that level of that. The people, of course, power to the people and things like that, but like the community actually has a power to, hey, maybe bring something to the precinct and say, this is what we need.
Or come out to our events, speak with us. So I hear what you're saying. I think that's something that we're looking to do today, even on this show, because personally, I do believe that there's obviously perspectives on both sides, on the community side and also on the law enforcement side, and what that looks like. I think what you mentioned earlier about you representing the human race, I think sometimes people impose certain ideas on people of certain positions. So law enforcement, I guess even the president of the United States, any political leaders, sometimes, people are not allowed to be human, um, or they have stricter standards enforced on them, and some of them are correctly so, right? But so what we really are hoping to do here today on this show is give you that platform. We do want to hear from other people in law enforcement, so if this is something that you believe that you have something to offer and a perspective to share, definitely get in contact with us as well.
Because that's what ultimately we're looking to do. It's, we could have a blame fest. We could have we often talk about race and how do we get different races together. And to make it very simple, black and white, we say, well, how do we get white people into the room? Why are we not able to get enough white people into the room? And from our research, it's that nobody wants to be bashed. I don't care how much you might be at fault or your people are at fault. Or nobody wants to walk into a firing pit and
Absolutely.
so forth. And we want to create spaces that we can invite the police and then invite the community so we can have, because we can go back and forth, like we said, about y'all doing this and y'all are doing that, but like we're not gonna get rid of the police. Like some people just be like, "I'm gonna just get rid of the MRP." I'm like, okay, well that's definitely not gonna happen.
Right.
So how are we gonna move forward with things? Going back to the leadership and power, from your perspective, what is something that the community can do to maybe have better leverage when it comes to talking to the police or making demands for the community?
I don't even know that it has to be a demand. I think relationships, right? Coming to the precinct, having conversations with police when you see them. CPR, the same thing that the police department is charged with, having communities give that also, and like just remembering that they're human and that they have children at home, and that they're charged with this great big responsibility. And the truth is, no one wants to get rid of the police. Like,
Right.
our jobs, are to serve and protect. And I think that when everyone swore in to do that, they did that because they really wanted to be a hero. They really wanted to save people and protect people. And somewhere along the lines, I think it doesn't look like what you signed up for, and you may lose sight of that, right? That happens, you may realize that you're not as much appreciated, and sometimes that's just like with inside of employment, like when you don't get along with your boss, so you don't feel like your leadership appreciates you, and then you go out and you don't feel like community appreciates you. So maybe it's showing up as carelessness.
Yes.
But inside of what can be created in relationship, like I always remembered that I was human, and I was just always holding on to the idea that I'm a mother, of 2 sons. I'm a sister of 4 brothers and a sister. So like the people matter, and I always want to be present for that. But people are human, and it takes a lot of strength and courage to manage your life and be in service the way that police have to be in service.
Can you give us some examples of things that, I mean, obviously cops are humans, right? But what are some things that would get in the way of someone effectively being able to do their job in that role?
Well, I'll tell you off the rip some of the issues that we're seeing. We see it, so it hits the news, and some of it is corruption, right? And that's something that I haven't experienced in my present, corruption or abuse of authority. And you know why? Because like my friend said earlier, birds of a feather flock together. I'm not going to be in the presence of other police that behave that way, because my perspective on how to treat people is different from that, right? So just like
They wouldn't be able to do that around you because you're not holding that
correct,
space.
absolutely. And just the same, would you be hanging out with someone who's lawless if you're a law-abiding citizen, right? Maybe here and there you may come across them, but would they be behaving in a certain way? No, because you wouldn't keep them in your company. So what we want to be mindful of is that the representative, right? The people that we're coming into contact, the people that are making the news for the bad things that they're doing on both sides, is just a small component of each community, right? And really at the heart of everyone is wants to be good and wants to do good and is, right? Otherwise, life in New York City with 8 million people would be crazy, and we're really doing well as far as crime is concerned. Being able to walk the streets freely. But as far as like what would present those things, those behaviors, those things that would affect an individual with their judgment being poor. But otherwise, cops are human too. So could I misrepresent myself today if I was having a bad day? If I just, my babysitter, didn't show up on time, and then I was late for work, and then I got reprimanded at work, and then, then I had an altercation with, someone while I was doing I could have a bad day and say some things or do some things that I wouldn't want to do.
Right, or not be so smiley or whatever.
Right.
So earlier you mentioned that it's like a family, right, being in the police force. And, I think we all recognize that there's a brotherhood that's present. What does that look like with accountability, right? So I understand that, birds of a feather flock together. But what about when you know something's happening, whether or not you're directly involved or not? What responsibility do other cops, other people in the force have in holding their fellow police officers accountable? And, we can talk about the no snitching rule here as well a little bit and what that looks like in the force, based on your own experience and perspective. So corporate.
No snitching.
Right, because I've never heard of the no snitching rule, and that sounds more like a street perspective than a police perspective, right? So maybe there's the idea that one wouldn't want to go tell on someone if they were doing something wrong, but the same brotherhood that exists in that culture, in that community, exists outside with community, right? The idea that maybe I'll just, keep a blind eye. Maybe I don't have the courage to speak up and tell on this person, right? So, because are you like making phone calls when you walk to the corner and you see drug dealers out there on the corner? Right. Like, oh yeah, he's doing wrong. He's, infested, our community and not. No, do you do that? I don't know a lot of people that do. Some do, and some of us do, and some of us command the kind of respect that would never happen in our presence, right? So wherever it's happening, it's with that conglomerate of people who are interested in that or behaving that way. So it's just the same on the outside as it is on the inside.
So one of the things Jarrell and I were talking the other day about the brotherhood, and Jarrell's in a fraternity and I'm in a sorority, and so we had to recognize that we have our own level of brotherhood, sisterhood, where
Next session, moving right along.
Where we also, we have to examine ourselves, right? What things have we maybe looked the other way for in our own communities, and not just having to be in an organization, obviously, but anywhere.
I often just use the word order because we use it a lot because we're in fraternities and sororities or we say fraternal order of, these are not secret words. People get all conspiracy about them. Yeah. But when we're talking about order is kind of prevalent throughout all of what we do, and there's been a lot of conversation about accountability and telling, and I think where Nussie is coming from, I think we have a slightly different understanding because we come from some form of order. But I've talked to military folks who didn't see the correlation of bro, you're in order. There's certain stuff you cannot say. There's a level of corruption that might be going on that is above your pay grade. And I think there's just a different understanding between common citizens. I don't want to say common you're not in a frat, you commoner. That's not what I mean. But for people who have no understanding of what order looks like, is that something that is it just is, or is that something that don't know how to say this. Like, is that something we can really address, like the order of things?
It is. It has to begin with the culture within whatever organization. It has to start with most likely leadership. Leadership has to choose to hold people accountable and hold people high, right? And have them be full with integrity by living through example. And so in certain organizations, that piece around integrity, I'm holding you high. If you're my brother and we're in this fraternity, right, together, I'm holding you high based on principles and beliefs that we created and the culture that we created within.
Right.
And so that's how that usually looks. And when people are not being challenged to those standards, being held to it, when there's a lack of integrity within that structure and that system, for whatever reasons, there's many reasons for that.
Right.
Then that's it, you know. So it has to happen there.
Speaking of leadership, is there anyone during your time, whether in the past or present, any leaders that you want to shout out in the police system, right? So we understand that there's a lot of negative talk. So is there anyone that you want to shout out for doing something specific or implementing a policy that you thought was groundbreaking?
And it could be personal. It could be somebody who showed you the ropes or kept it 100 with you, or you know.
So I won't particularly name any names, but what I'll say is that I have always in my career had someone that was willing to support me, help me, or understand me. I've often felt like an outsider for wanting to hold myself to the higher standards. But it's my responsibility. I just came to accept that and not hold it as something heavy. But I've always had someone. And yeah, there's a lot of good people in the police department. In fact, most of them are, and most of them would want to know that that you think, that you care about the fact that they have families and that they come out and they give 8 to 12 hours of their day to make sure that you're safe.
So my brother-in-law is a sergeant. He works for the Traffic and Tunnels Authority, though. And I've had some conversations with him. He's a Bengali Muslim man, right? And so in dealing with other people in his branch, I guess, right? What special considerations he may have had in certain situations where, as a Bengali Muslim man, maybe he viewed something a little bit differently than some of his counterparts, or maybe he witnessed something that didn't sit right with him, or maybe, you know, maybe some people didn't listen to him because of who he was. Are there any special considerations or that you have had because of your background, or have you dealt with anything being a black woman in the force, whether it's with the force or with the community, and how they reacted to you?
Okay, so if you're asking me, did I experience or believe that I may have experienced sexism or racism? Absolutely have experienced it. And yeah, it's hurtful, it's painful. And the truth is, it created a lot of pain and anger. But I came to realize that the pain and the anger wasn't serving me, right? And I wanted to be able to see past that and connect. So it does exist. Like, I don't think that the conversations, the focus on that is really necessary, right? I think what the vision is, how do we move from this place, right? How do we move from those stories? How do we move from that pain and that anger? Because we're constantly rehashing that, and it's not creating progress. I remember that it would have me depressed or sad or angry, but never creating results that made a change, that made a difference. So like when we're constantly given that energy and focus, now what? Like, because are we? Does someone say, yes, I'm sorry, I was guilty of being racist and sexist to you, and now what? So there I am with that. Yeah.
Forward pushing. She's like, I don't got time for it. That's cool. What stereotypes? What stereotypes would you like to dispel about officers?
That they don't care. That's one big one. That they have all of this power that a lot of police officers are not feeling as empowered as you feel that they feel. They actually feel beat up sometimes within the organization, and then when they come out into the street. And a lot of them, because of their fears of how they'll be looked at, are even afraid to defend themselves and use the laws that we have in place to enforce. Because of how they feel they're going to be viewed, when they have absolutely every right to affect law and order in communities. Yeah. And I will not ever tell anyone not to defend themselves, or I don't believe that because police are afraid of what it looks like, that they should put down their right to enforce the law, ever.
I think that's very interesting when you say afraid. I think that is something that escapes our connection with police. Again, back to the word power, or even us naming the episode Thin Blue Line, right? I mean, we talked about what we were going to name it and everything, and that term comes up, and I believe I know what it means. I'm going to ask you in a second, but I know when that comes up, or the symbology of the police, it comes off as them and us. They have the power, we don't have the power. And just from what you said, I think I can imagine how that would sound, reverberated through neighborhoods where police are actually at, trying to interact with communities. And it's like, yo, we feel fear too. Not just fear for my life and fear for safety, but like we don't have the power that it might seem from the corner or whatever have you.
Just adding on that, so my perspective has shifted over the years, right? Let's just bring up police killings really quickly, since that's, let's just get to it. Obviously, every situation is different, and there's different circumstances around that. And there have been some where it's just like, oh shit, like, what did the police do? And there are some that I believe sometimes there's a little bit more of a gray area, right? Because in recognizing that cops are also human, sometimes my personal perspective is, yes, there's a level of training that cops should have, and they should not be so quick to grab their guns and kill people. And I do think that they know where to shoot as well. So if they really needed to, they should be able to dismantle someone without having to kill them. But I also recognize that there's a innate human feeling of feeling fear, of being in neighborhoods where they know that they're not liked, being in situations where sometimes it's a split reaction, right? So really, I'm just putting that out there. I don't know, Jarrell, what your perspective is around that. But
my perspective is in the middle, because I do perspective. So I do try to put myself in the position of some of these officers. I know from what some of this shit looks like, it's just straight hate and just what this country is based on. And it would be that way whether it was an officer or not, some of these actions. I think a large thing for black and brown people kind of goes above the police, and it's more so about the repercussions. It seems like you have this one, he lost his cool. This one, he was frazzled. This one, and there's nobody going to jail. There seems to be no kind of repercussions for having those kind of outbursts. It seems like way more cops getting off than not being properly disciplined. And so therefore it comes back to the people of when somebody gets killed, it's almost a instant Instagram meme of, oh, he gonna get off, or she's gonna get off, and that causes such a foul
Distrust.
distrust.
Yeah.
You know, and I think as I'm hearing from you talk, you know, we have such a strong presence with the police. We only know it to be the police. Like the police come and lock you up. The police give the sentences. The police put you in, you know, and because that's who we deal with most of the times. When I think a lot of the time, yes, it's the enforcement, and then there's the fact that there aren't proper repercussions for people who step outside of the line. And there's always repercussions for the citizen. You know, there is no, oh, I smacked that officer that one time and,
Right.
you know,
I'm gonna
there's
never go home.
Yeah, there's no going home after that, you know. So, perspective-wise, I think, I know we just both said something and didn't ask a question, but I think it's more so that the repercussions, there aren't any repercussions, or it doesn't seem like it.
So my question, I guess, would be, what do you think needs to be put in place for communities of color specifically, and the police to get along better, to be understood better, right? Where they can start having these, they can empathize with the other, right? What do you think would help?
I think including police in all the community events, seeing them as humans, that'll be the start to creating it's relationships. So they're human beings. So they party and they give birth and they raise children and they do all the same things that the public does and likes to do. But I want to say, as far as the repercussions are concerned, right? Like you said, police, but there's a judicial system, right? And the judicial system often, you know, pulls a jury, right? People that are from the community to make these decisions. They are, each one is a separate case to be looked at and reviewed. And also, there are times that there aren't repercussions for, right, the common man, the civilian that's doing a crime and they're coming back out, or that they're not, you know, serving, you know, time the way they should be. So, you know, we would place that responsibility on the judicial system, but right, making us all responsible. What do we do from the shoes that we stand in? Like, how could that look different? For me personally, or if I'm in the justice system, you know, or, you know, am I showing up to court for court dates? You know, am I, you know, showing up to the community board meetings, right? Those are important things.
You're going to have people who are automatically closed off to that conversation. So we are looking to, you know, obviously create spaces in an open, safe space. Even today, while Jarrell and I have our own perspectives around cops and community and what that looks like, first of all, we're open to having our perspective shifted, but we also don't have a certain agenda. Like, we don't know where this conversation is going to go, what you're going to say. We can't make you say certain things or, you know, anything like that. And so just really just putting that out there. So thank you for bringing that up.
These conversations come easier for us, I think, because we don't have to fight you. Like, I don't have to come back with you about, well, these are the stats and these are the stats. It's really for a voice. There's many people who've never heard the voice that you've given today, and some of the key points that you made and the standpoints to just say most people don't see the cops as human. You know, this guy's a soldier, so he's got his guns, he's got his car, he's got his protection, and I think. For all the stuff that I have experienced with some really shitty cops, I still, my family's cops, you know, and I think a majority of us might have a family member, of relative, where we could say, hey, man, this is a human being, you know.
I mean, my brother-in-law is a sergeant, right? And while he does work for the Traffic and Tunnels Authority, so we may not, you know, be as worried all the time, but there are situations where, like, you know, I know with my sister, she's concerned for her husband. That's a real human being, right? That's my family member. And so being part of family, he has kids. That's the father of my niece and nephew. So obviously his whereabouts and what he's dealing with is a concern for the family. And so to even have that in there, like, these are not just, you know, they matter too, right? So.
Well, it's because of you creating the space for this to happen, right? That everyone has a perspective, and every perspective matters. So I'm so grateful to be able to speak, and whether representing or not representing, this is my perspective.
Yes.
But yeah, one thing that's coming to mind about what can be done is that there's a community affairs officer in every precinct. And I would actually ask the community affairs officer, like, what's happening this week with the police? Because the police are playing basketball, they're creating all kinds of programs, education programs, all kinds of things are happening every day with the police, and they're dying to be acknowledged, right, for the work that they're doing every single day. So that's one thing that I encourage people to do. It's like, get involved. Go to the local precinct. I don't
Meet
know.
your
Take
officers.
them some cupcakes, and they're probably going to corner eye you and look at you like, I don't know. And they may be a little worried at first, but like, it takes time to build a relationship, and just know that, and be empowered to be a leader in community.
I'm going to ask you a quick side question.
Yes.
And this is a stereotype from The Simpsons, but do cops really like donuts?
All right, good one.
All this deep shit.
That's a great one. That's a great one. And the answer is no, not as much as they're accused of, but they do like the coffee.
Okay, so coffee, not the donuts.
It's the
Got it. So Lisa, thank you for being with us here tonight. A lot of great conversation. We recognize that whenever we start a conversation that it's only the beginning, and there's so much more to talk about. And so we do invite everyone to actually go out and introduce yourselves to your local precinct. If you have any events, invite them out, right? And so that's something for us to also take note of, right? We get to invite some of them out to our events, because we're always having events, and that's not even something we ever thought about. So
Yeah, and I really do want to highlight that, because that is a powerful thing that we didn't know what we'd get from this conversation, but coming out of like, okay, how does it look with us as a community moving forward? And I mean a global community. People in police, people in the community, either one is not getting rid of the other. So how do we really move forward? I would love to see what we first envisioned, which is this in the community.
in the police force, right?
Yeah,
So I know
with
you
the
mentioned
lack of
earlier
police, with
there's diversity
folks.
training. So I am perspective through the work that we've done at this point. We've had well over 40 different events,
This is
different
shameless
cities.
plug time.
This is shameless plug time. I think we've developed a curriculum that is actually probably, my perspective is that is better than the current diversity programs out there, because what we're not looking to do is teach people and have them sitting in a learning situation, but where people actually get to interact with people. So what would it look like to have I Am Perspective with the police force and the community directly? To have cops and different law enforcement officers sitting with a regular civilian face to face and having these conversations.
Humanizing conversations.
And to support with having that happen.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
So
Thank
you
you.
heard it here first. Don't talk about it. Be about it. Go find you a local officer. Bring them some cupcakes. But know that you might get side-eyed.
No, they don't have poison in this office. Lisa, is there anything else that you wanted to, if you want to plug yourself, you have something you're working on, you want us to know about, where we can follow you, please let us know.
Lisa Marie Newkirk on Instagram and Facebook. And thank you so much. Again, I'm grateful to be here. And this is actually a part of my vision, is to be able to have these conversations and support community and police relationships, because you are all my family.
Excellent.
Thank you,
So
thank you.
We're being streamed worldwide, so this conversation is reverberating and resonating. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been episode 7 of the I Am Perspective Radio Show, The Thin Blue Line.
Yeah.
Next on WEMS Radio, we have Speak It Into Existence with Did I say may I? That's a speak.
With May I
With
Speak.
may I speak. Speak into existence. Speak it.
Speak
She's gonna
into
correct it.
existence with May I Speak.
Next week, same time, same place, 6 p.m. Tuesdays. We are out of here. Peace.